Today we will dive into mixing on headphones, specifically what to look after when you're mixing on headphones. Maybe we'll touch a little bit on reverbs and decays, on target curves, on comparisons between using your studio monitors versus headphones and stuff like that. And I have two really cool engineers with me this time. So Kevin Paul and Eduardo de la Paz, both British-based engineers. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome. Thank you, Rok.
I've been quite impressed by your discography. So you've been working with really cool names, worldwide knowns from Adele, Robbie Williams, Florence and the Machine, Paolo Nutini, etc. These are really, really cool names. So how did you guys get into the music industry and got to work with such amazing artists?
Okay, cool. The journey was, I moved from Mexico originally to Liverpool, where I did uni. Then after uni, I moved to London and I started assisting in studios, like as many as I could, from Strong Room, Miloco, like big companies that have loads of studios. And then through those, I started working with a mixer producer called Craig Silvey, and that's when I started working on bigger projects, like Arcade Fire, The National, New Order, just as his right-hand man, assistant, and engineer, and then that kind of informed me that I really, really enjoyed the mixing side rather than recording side. And then obviously slowly started to pick up tricks here and there, started working with up-and-coming bands, and then later set my own mix studio, and then been here for 6 years, and then just mixing away really, which I really enjoy.
Beautiful. And Kevin, what's your story?
What's my journey? Very similar to Eduardo, and I think most people's journeys when they come into the recording industry, find a studio, learn the ropes at the studio, then hopefully get allowed sit in the chair and do some engineering. My main opportunities really came from a record label called Mute Records, which is home to artists like Depeche Mode, Moby, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Goldfrapp, and many others. They've got lots of independent artists as well on their label. And I spent about 10 years just basically working with all those great guys. At the moment, and predominantly for the last few years, I've been doing a lot of work with Nick Cave, and obviously in my own independent studio with artists from all over the world. And I've been trying to, or I haven't been trying to, but I've been working a lot in surround sound. We did a lot of surround sound mixing in Mute Records, and I've done something like about 34 studio albums in surround sound. And which now, obviously, with the Dolby Atmos thing, I'm trying to break through into that as well, because I think it's a great format.
So let's maybe start with, headphones' role in your mixing process. So Kevin, you've started explaining the immersiveness of your mixing. Obviously, headphones have a great role in immersive mixing. So what is your take on this?
Well, I mean, headphones in general play a large part in my mixing, and whether it's stereo or Dolby Atmos. For me, in stereo, they're either a really good starting place, like if you're remotely and you're not in the studio, or you end up using headphones at the end of your mixing process where you want to check something just in another environment, just as another set of monitors. In terms of Atmos and immersive mixing, I think they're going to play a very critical role, because essentially most people have access to a pair of headphones. And for me, that seems to be, or possibly seems to be, how the majority of people will consume content in that format.
Yeah, absolutely true. So, Eduardo, did you ever mix anything in Dolby or Ambisonics maybe?
No, I'm primarily... Oh, can you hear me now? We good?
Yeah, So,
Yeah.
Eduardo, you were saying, so you
Oh,
do
yeah.
also mix something in?
Not really. Like, I'm primarily a stereo mixer. Obviously, as Kevin, I'm interested in the Atmos concept and the Atmos format. I've been to a few studios that have Atmos, and it's very interesting to hear it in a full system. You know, a 7.1.4 or 7.1.2. It sounds very interesting, and then how it folds down to headphones like binaural audio. But no, I'm primarily using headphones in my mixing process, just to check mixes at the end of the mixing process, or if I'm remotely, as Kevin says, just like if you're not in your studio and you need something good, you can do 80% of your mixing in headphones.
So what do you think is the most critical part in mixing that you absolutely need to, or you absolutely benefit from mixing in a proper room with stereo speakers?
In speakers, I guess, I mean, a lot of things. One is knowing the room and knowing your speakers, so you kind of know exactly what you need to get out of them. But I guess things like placing the low end, you have your kick and bass. Sometimes that can be tricky in headphones. Well, in speakers, if you know your speakers and you know your room, instantly you know, like, okay, this works, this doesn't work. Reverb tails, I would say you can benefit from speakers, but also from headphones. So I would check them in both systems. I would start with speakers, and then when I'm towards the end of the day, I would check them on my headphones, and then obviously compare that they translate in both systems.
So using headphones is, well, it's obviously a tool for every audio engineer, right? So maybe Kevin, you can shed some lights on how you use them and what would be your critical part of the mix that you absolutely always check on headphones as well.
Well, for me, headphones are another way of checking your mixes. Technology's obviously got a lot better. So years and years and years ago, there were very few options for speakers. There were very few options for rooms. There were very few options for headphones themselves. But technology now has allowed us to kind of mix anywhere. And for me, headphones have always played a part in my mixing. Whether that's just checking the low end, like Eduardo referred to, or just checking the overall balance of the mix. When you're comfortable with your headphones, they're like another pair of monitors in the studio. I think headphones are always important because, like I said before, a lot of people consume content on them. So it's something that you just have to do. Personally, I find it very useful and have always done in 20 years of mixing records for people.
Now, when it comes to spaciousness of mixing, right? We always talk about let's have some more air, let's have some more spacious mix, more clarity, etc. Right? So, when it comes to headphones, you do have two speakers very close to your ears, and there's very little crossfit, or basically zero crossfit between your ears, and that absolutely, it changes your approach, I think, in some areas, right? So we do know that 75-80% of all your music will be consumed on headphones, right? So it also makes sense, or it advocates that it makes sense mixing headphones first in some areas, or at least some decisions should be made for headphones first mixing. And I'm wondering if you if you give it any thoughts, or do you approach that? Do you consider this aspect that some things will sound better in headphones if you mix them for headphones from scratch?
I don't necessarily think that is the case. I think as a mixing engineer, you're trying to get a broad consensus across all the ways that people listen to music. I think if you try to mix things solely for computer speakers, you're not going to get the translation on a big stereo speakers, for instance. And I think the same would apply that if you tried to mix your music for, let's say, Apple Buds, I don't necessarily think they're going to sound great on OLLO headphones, for instance. So I think as a mixing engineer, maybe Eduardo would offer some input on that. You're trying to get a broad consensus across a range of mediums.
Yeah, you do, but
How
they're
or why
still.
you do that, I don't necessarily.
Yeah, no, I think I agree. I don't think. Yeah, I don't think I would mix for headphones or mix for speakers or mix for laptop speakers, for example, or for phone speakers. I think, yeah, as a mixer, I agree with Kevin. You kind of do your best in whatever environment you have, being headphones, speakers, or both, in order to create a mix that will translate in all of those formats. Yeah, I think headphones are a tool to get there, to get the best sounding mix, because you got a different set, a different system that you can check them. But I wouldn't mix for headphones or mix for speakers. I would just mix the best way I can using all the tools that I have, and at my reach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when it comes, consumers usually listen on colored, whatever system they use is always colored, or even if it's just computer playback, right? So this opens up the question that you'll find on many forums, and I'm sure you both are very familiar with. Is it comes down to target curves, or it comes down to what is the ideal specs for a room or ideal specs for the headphones, right? So there's a lot of topics, and you can learn a lot about room treatment and how to measure a room and what it should kind of sound, right? And when it comes to headphones, there's a lot less on this topic. So how did you two approach exploring the headphones monitoring system?
Well, I guess for me, headphones should be as flat as possible. Like you can see here, there's two pairs of speakers, one slightly different than the other, but I know what one does different from the other one. But when I'm gonna either mix on headphones or check my mixes on headphones, I don't want headphones that are gonna color the sound. I want something that is like a true translation of what I've been doing in my room for the last 5-6 hours. So yeah, like headphones that are gonna put a curve on the low end or on the top end, it's a no for me. But yeah, I don't know. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah.
What were you? Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I'd agree. You want flat sounding headphones for a start. You also want headphones that are comfortable and that you can listen to, should you want to, for a long period of time. And I think also you want things that you like and you feel comfortable with what you're hearing. I think a lot, my ears are different to Eduardo's and different to yours, Rok. But at the same time, you want something that, as a product, in much the same way monitors are chosen, you want a product that you feel that you trust. And for me, this is like probably the number one factor when it comes to maybe choosing a pair of headphones.
So we already touched before on immersive audio, right? So the tech is here, right? It's obviously Dolby's probably number one player in this area, but there are others as well. And as we go on, in a couple of years, we'll probably have, either we'll reach a consensus and we'll all be using the same thing, or we'll have multiple options to go with. So I'm wondering, how is the industry getting ready for this transition? Because we had that before, and you both, I'm sure, remember the surround sound in the 90s and early 2000s when, people were buying these home setups that were never properly set up or never used, or there was a lack of content or whatever. So do you think that this could happen again? There is a specific technology available for audio creators, but it might not survive. Are we ready to embrace it? What do you think, guys?
Well, I've been lecturing in surround.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, go. Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't have much experience in mixing for surround yet, as Kevin has, but I do think the technology this time is more user-friendly because a consumer will be able to buy some headphones and listen to a mix that was done in a full Atmos system. So I think that's very interesting, that it would be able to translate to anyone like going in their commute in the morning, they'll be able to listen to something that was mixed in 12 speakers, 14 speakers, 16 speakers. What worries me a little bit, and I think it's just a very new technology, is the fold down part of it. I think right now it's a bit of like, well, it's gonna, whatever the algorithm is doing, whatever the fold down thing is doing, we just gotta trust that it will be okay. But I think there's still a lot of variables that will become clear in the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. Finesse details that will make it a very interesting format, I guess.
Do you receive any, requests from your artists already, Eduardo?
I've been asked, as usual, you send stems at the end of the mix to the client, to the artist or the label. But now, yeah, like I'm getting more requests of like, can you send us the stems because we're gonna mix this in Atmos, and that's another kind of warm, because I print my stems pre-mix bus. But then the Atmos mixer will probably have to recreate my mix bus in a way, or I would have to print the stems again post mix bus in order for the Atmos, the starting point of the Atmos mix, to be a true representation of the stereo mix. I mean, there's ways around it. It's just a little bit of a communication between me and the Atmos mixer, and then it gets sorted. It's no problem.
Yeah. So Kevin, we talked on the phone like a week or two ago, and you mentioned you have a specific way or approach to immersive audio. Maybe you can share your thoughts.
Yeah, I think with immersive audio, I think what is happening is that people are finally realizing that actually there's other ways to consume music other than in stereo, and I think the transition from stereo to immersive is very similar in the transition from mono to stereo. And mono to stereo took 20 odd years for it to really kind of shift all the way over to stereo, and I think it's going to be the same kind of thing for immersive audio. And in fact, if you think about it, you mentioned earlier the surround sound kind of push in the 2000s, and here we are like 15-20 years later, we're having another push into immersive audio. And I think for me, in my lectures that I've been doing for a number of years, I've always said the same thing to the people that I'm speaking to, which is, number one, don't treat it like a gimmick. It's not something to kind of show off how many speakers you have in your room. And number two, always be respectful to the song that you're working on or the piece of music you're working on. And I think it's a similar approach when you're mixing in stereo. In stereo, you're always trying to be faithful to the song, and I think people need to remember that when they're mixing in Atmos. It's exactly the same approach, really. I've often said in my... Go on.
Yeah, I was just trying to comment on your thoughts, since we were visiting Synchron Stage in Vienna a while back, and we talked to their engineers there, and we experienced the full-blown Dolby Atmos with a demo song from Dolby, and it is a different experience without a doubt, but it's also a little bit confusing. We are very, very much used to hearing or picturing a band kind of in front of us with some kind of a landscape or audioscape from left to right. And in immersiveness or with Dolby, it's kind of weird to have somebody singing at you from behind or a chair on the top of your head. So that kind of takes it's interesting, but it also kind of asks the consumer to accept that. Do you think it's the same story as going from mono to stereo? It's just going to take a little bit of time, or is this just too confusing?
I don't think it's confusing, and I think if I was to say to you, if you have children, those children grow up with technology, and for them it's absolutely instantaneous and completely accepted what it does and how it works. dare I say it, we're older people who have to learn how technology works. For people in the future, when they hear all music in a certain format, they'll just accept it as how it is, and they won't be questioning the way it was or the way it could have been. They'll just go, oh, that's how it sounds. That's how it sounds. It sounds great. There you go. Or they go, that's how it sounds. I don't like that. You know, and I think us older people, the older generation, we just have to kind of go with the format and actually just embrace it, because it's here. It's not going away. Thankfully, it's taken a technology company, Apple and Dolby in this case, to really make a push for the format. And I think they just might well succeed in making Atmos as, if not the main way, certainly an equal way to consume music in the future. I've been waiting for this for 15 years.
There is the binaural rendering part of Atmos, right? When you're down mixing, you kind of get to the binaural part, which is obviously headphones, which is probably, you know, how 99% of consumers will ever experience immersive audio. So here's my questions to you, right? Both of you. So for example, Paul, how do you approach that, knowing that at the end it's going to be binaural version? And for you, Eduardo, you didn't mix in that yet, but approaching or upgrading your studio going forward, will you consider going full specs, for example, Dolby Atmos 714 or whatever speakers, or will you consider trying to learn your environment just using headphones? So maybe Eduardo, you can start.
Sure. Well, at the moment, because the technology is so new, and I'm primarily mixed stereo, won't be upgrading. But if I were to get into Atmos mixing, I would definitely try to get the specs, you know, as high or as good as possible, because I have seen or have heard of a lot of so-called Atmos mixers that they do everything on headphones, and I think you at least have to start, you know, on a treated room, and then you can fall down to binaural, and that's absolutely fine. My only concern with the format, and maybe Kevin that has done more of this than me, is the folding down from a full Atmos system to a binaural. Right now or it's not easily available. Like, what does it actually happen? And I think us as engineers should be very concerned at what happens to the audio. Is it just a bit of EQ? Is it a bit of phase, com filtering? It just seems to be a bit vague at the moment. What actually happens to the audio when it falls down? You know, what happens to the bed? What happens to the objects? And should we just assume that it's going to sound okay? And that's the part that I'm not 100% sold on it yet.
I think all of those are valid points, Eduardo. In terms of the binaural aspect of the fold down of the mix, you have options on how to place those objects on the bed. So you can either have the objects all exactly in the same way as they are within the mix, or you can have them in three settings, be it near, mid and far, and that adds a little bit of ambience to the sound. The good thing about binaural as a format is that it's being developed all the time in terms of how to improve that aspect of spatial audio or immersive audio. So I think most people recognize that actually, in order for the format to succeed, they have to make the headphone experience as good as possible for the listener, and they will eventually, the software people, you know, we're talking about geniuses here who know how to code and make things happen. Those guys will work out how to make the presentation as best as it can. I think one of the good things is that they're consulting with lots of music people. They're consulting with people like yourself, with Rok, like myself, and they're actually trying to say, how can we make this a better experience? And for that, for me, will be the real test is really. And I think eventually it'll get there. You know, 3 to 5 years, I think kind of Rok suggested. And I think over that time, you know, things are going to move really quickly within the space. I'm fairly certain of that, because I think it's going to move quickly because people are putting the right amount of investment into the medium. Back in the days of the surround formats in 2000, you had Sony putting money into it and maybe a few other people. But really, you were dependent on people having 6 speakers in their house. Now, with the Dolby Atmos and Immersive Audio, you're not dependent on 6 or 11 speakers. You're dependent on people just having a pair of headphones, and everybody's got a pair of headphones. I'm very excited about it, really.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, guys, we are kind of running out of the time we have reserved for this podcast. As always, this one is distributed by the Headliner magazine based in UK. So do you guys know?
Yeah.
I've heard of Headliner, yes. Yeah. It's a good magazine.
It is. I want to say thank you for participating. I wish we could talk longer, and I think that this debate could be hours straight on. But we do need to stop over here, and hopefully we'll do it again sometime, and maybe dive into more into your mixing approaches and the musicality. Now we've been talking about technology all this episode. We didn't touch on anything musical, basically. Well, let's just finish up with the last question, or something that I've noticed working with our community. Everybody knows great artists, right? We all understand who Paolo Nutini is. We all know who Adele is. We all know these kind of things. But we also see, especially me when I'm talking to you guys, I see kind of unappreciated part that you guys are doing in delivering those great mixes and great artists. So, you know, there is a consumer world knowing the artists, but nobody really knows what you guys do and you have to do in order to really make those artists shine. So do you think you're underappreciated, or is this just part of the job?
I don't think we're underappreciated. I think if you get into the world of engineering, mixing, even producing, I think we're at least I'm not in it for the fame or for the attention. You're here because you love music and you love working with different artists. I'm not here to have thousands of followers on Instagram or get the paparazzi out of my studio. Although I do have to say that it's very important, especially in this digital world, that artists and labels credit their engineers, because that's the only way we get recognized within the industry and get more work and get references from other people. Yeah,
I think Eduardo's 100% right. You know, you don't come into this business to be famous. You come into this business to make music. I love making music. I love working with artists. I love being creative. There is a big push now for engineers, producers, even assistants, and rightfully so, and studios to get the right credits on digital albums. How that works, I'm not really clever enough to know how that can work personally, but I do know that there's a lot of people trying to make sure that we get credited, and rightfully so.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Kevin, Paul, and Eduardo de la Paz this time with us. Thank you guys for joining us, and until the next time, stay strong, stay safe.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Thanks very much, Rok. Take care. Thanks, Eduardo.
Thanks, Kevin.
Bye-bye.